All right, everyone, buckle up. We're diving deep into a cornerstone of Indian democracy, the Supreme Court.
This one's for everyone, but especially for those prepping for the UPSC exams.
We're going to go beyond the textbook stuff, explore the power dynamics, controversy.
Few real stories behind this institution.
Trust me, understanding the Supreme Court isn't just about acing the exam.
It's about understanding how India works.
What's fascinating is how India's judicial system is structured.
Right.
It's unique, really. Unlike, say, the U.S., with separate federal and state courts, we've got one unified system.
One system.
Imagine a massive tree, the Supreme Court at the top branching out to high courts.
I see.
And then down to the lower courts forming the roots. This structure gives the Supreme Court a hand in everything.
So it's not just some distant elite institution.
Not at all. It touches local disputes all the way up to national issues.
Affecting people's lives on a daily basis.
Precisely.
But hold on, let's rewind a bit. How did the Supreme Court even come about? Picture this. 1950, India's newly independent. The Constitution establishes the Supreme Court.
Okay.
It takes over from the Federal Court of India.
Right.
But here's the key difference. The Supreme Court also replaced the British Privy Council
as the highest court of appeal.
Exactly, making it the ultimate legal authority in India.
A real shift in power. No more appeals going all the way to London. So we have this powerful court. How do judges even get chosen?
It's not a simple process, actually. The president of India appoints judges, including the Chief Justice.
Right.
But there's a catch. There's mandatory consultation with existing judges.
No, there's always a catch.
And the way consultation is interpreted, well, that's where things get interesting.
UPSC aspirants, take note. This is the kind of detail that could trip you up on the exam.
It's like a legal tug of war.
Oh.
Initially, consultation was just a formality.
Okay.
Then came these landmark cases, the first, second, third, and fourth judges' cases.
Right.
They gradually shifted the balance, emphasizing the Chief Justice's opinion on appointments.
So it became less of a suggestion and more of a must-do for the president?
Exactly.
Okay, so power dynamics. What if there's a judge who isn't performing well, maybe involved in a scandal? How easy is it to remove a Supreme Court judge?
Removing a Supreme Court judge is a monumental task.
How that?
It's called impeachment.
Yeah.
Requires a special majority in both houses of Parliament.
Wow.
And it can only happen on very specific grounds, proven misbehavior or incapacity.
So public opinion or political pressure isn't enough?
Not at all. Hard evidence is needed.
Has any judge ever actually been removed?
Nope, not a single one. The case of Justice V. Ramaswamy in the early 90s is a good example.
I've heard of that.
He was found guilty of misbehavior, but the impeachment failed in the Lok Sabha. He stayed on the bench.
So the emphasis on security of tenure for Supreme Court judges is serious business.
Absolutely.
Let's move beyond judges and controversies for a second. What does the Supreme Court do day to day? Main functions.
One of its main roles is resolving disputes within the Indian Federation. It's called original jurisdiction.
Original jurisdiction.
Meaning it's the only court that can handle conflicts between the central government and a state, or even between different states.
Like the ultimate referee.
Exactly. Keeping things running smoothly.
The court's responsibility goes beyond just settling those disputes, right?
Oh, absolutely. A crucial aspect is its role in safeguarding fundamental rights. This is where writ jurisdiction comes in.
Writ jurisdiction.
Both the Supreme Court and high courts can issue writs, basically legal orders, to protect these rights.
Give us an example. How does this work?
Say, someone's detained unlawfully. They or someone representing them can approach the court.
Okay.
They ask for a writ of habeas corpus.
Which compels the authorities to produce the person.
Exactly.
And justify the detention.
Yes, a powerful tool to prevent arbitrary arrests, protect individual liberty.
This is important stuff, especially for future civil servants.
Yeah.
You need to understand how citizens' rights are protected.
Absolutely. Now, both the Supreme Court and high courts have this writ jurisdiction.
Right.
But there's a difference. The Supreme Court can only issue writs related to fundamental rights. High courts have a broader scope.
Interesting. So the high court's power is actually wider in this instance.
It is.
But the Supreme Court still has the final say. It's the highest court of appeal.
That's right.
Reviewing judgments from lower courts.
Exactly. A wide range, constitutional matters, civil disputes, criminal cases. It all leads up to the Supreme Court.
The final word on legal matters in India.
Yes.
Connecting this to the bigger picture. The Supreme Court sits at the apex of the Indian legal system.
You could say that.
It's the ultimate interpreter of the Constitution.
And the protector of citizens' rights.
So how do these cases reach the Supreme Court? What are the different paths for appeals?
Let's take constitutional matters. If a high court decides a case involves a substantial question about the Constitution's interpretation, the losing party can appeal to the Supreme Court.
To ensure consistency across the country.
Exactly. It's about applying the Constitution fairly and consistently.
UPSC aspirants, pay attention. Understanding how cases move through the system is key.
It helps you understand the Indian legal landscape.
What about civil cases? How do they reach the highest court?
Similar concept. A high court needs to certify that a civil case involves a significant question of law,
Okay.
that it has broader implications, then it can be appealed to the Supreme Court. It's a filter.
Ensuring that only substantial legal issues reach the top.
Exactly.
A clear hierarchy. And criminal cases, how do those end up before the Supreme Court?
Imagine a situation where a high court overturns a lower court's acquittal
Okay.
and sentences someone to death.
Wow.
In such high-stakes cases, there's an automatic right to appeal to the Supreme Court. It's the final safeguard.
Literally a matter of life or death.
Yes,
Are there other situations where a criminal case might go to the Supreme Court?
of course. Let's say a high court hears a case directly from a lower court, convicts the accused,
Okay.
and gives a sentence of life imprisonment or 10 years or more. That's appealable to the Supreme Court, too.
So multiple pathways, but the idea is to make sure serious cases get the highest level of scrutiny.
Precisely. The Supreme Court ensures justice is served, especially in cases with wide-ranging implications.
We've talked about appeals in constitutional, civil, criminal cases. But there's another route, appeals by special leave. What's that about?
This is where the Supreme Court's discretionary power comes in. It can grant special leave to appeal from any judgment
From any judge.
of any court or tribunal in India, except for military courts.
So it's like a safety valve for the Supreme Court.
Yes. Stepping in even if a case doesn't fit neatly into those other categories.
For cases that raise unique or really important issues.
Precisely. But it's not used lightly. The Supreme Court has emphasized that this power should be used sparingly, only in exceptional circumstances.
So they wield this power carefully. It's incredible how much responsibility the Supreme Court has.
It's not just about resolving disputes. It's about shaping the legal landscape, protecting the very foundations of Indian democracy.
Right.
And there's still more to uncover. We haven't even touched on the court's advisory role, its unique features as a court of record, or its power of judicial review. We'll delve into all of that next time.
Sounds like we have a lot more ground to cover. But for now, we'll take a quick break. Stay tuned. Our deep dive into the Indian Supreme Court continues.
Right after the break. Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were discussing the massive responsibility the Supreme Court has.
It's a delicate balance, right?
Yes.
Ensuring the court can act decisively while remaining independent.
It's a balancing act.
And that's where all those safeguards come in. The appointment process, security of tenure, the restrictions on discussing a judge's conduct in Parliament.
Precisely. All those mechanisms we talked about earlier, they're designed to protect the court's integrity and independence.
Like building a protective barrier around the judiciary.
A good analogy.
Keeping it safe from outside pressures.
Yes.
Let's shift gears a bit. How are judges compensated for their service?
Well, it's not all prestige and power. Judges do need to get paid, after all. Their salaries, allowances, and pensions are all determined by Parliament.
Makes sense.
But here's the interesting part. Once a judge is appointed, their compensation can't be reduced,
Really?
except during a financial emergency.
So no sneaky pay cuts for unpopular ruling.
Exactly.
That's a strong statement about judicial independence.
It removes any financial incentive for judges to sway one way or the other.
Out of curiosity, how much do they actually earn?
Well, as of 2009, the Chief Justice's salary was increased to $1 lakh per month.
Okay.
Other judges get $90,000 per month.
Not bad.
And there are a lot of perks, too. Housing, transportation, medical benefits, the whole package.
Right.
Even after retirement, they receive a generous pension, half of their last drawn salary.
Wow. It's a demanding job.
It is.
Makes sense that they're well compensated. What happens if the Chief Justice position is vacant? Or if they're temporarily unavailable?
There's a system in place for that. In those situations, the president can appoint an acting Chief Justice from among the sitting Supreme Court judges.
Like an understudy.
Exactly, to ensure a smooth transition and continuity.
Makes sense. What if there aren't enough permanent judges to even form a quorum?
That's where ad hoc judges come in. If there's a shortage, the Chief Justice of India can temporarily appoint a High Court judge to serve on the Supreme Court.
So they pull in someone from the High Court.
Exactly, to keep things moving.
This appointment isn't a solo decision, right?
You're right. It requires consultation with the Chief Justice of the High Court, and of course the President's consent.
Always checks and balances. It's fascinating how interconnected everything is. We've talked about acting judges, but I've also heard about retired Supreme Court judges serving. Is that true?
Yes, that's right. If needed, the Chief Justice of India can request a retired Supreme Court judge.
Okay.
Or even a retired High Court judge who's qualified for the Supreme Court to temporarily serve on the bench.
So tapping into a pool of experience.
Precisely.
There are conditions, though.
Right, of course. The president needs to approve, and importantly, the retired judge has to consent to serve.
It's voluntary.
Yes, they're not forced back into service.
That's good. This system ensures the Supreme Court has access to experience when needed, while still respecting the choices of retired judges. Where is the Supreme Court located?
The Constitution designates Delhi as the seat of the Supreme Court.
Delhi.
But here's an interesting twist. There's a provision allowing the Chief Justice of India, with the president's approval, to designate other places as seats of the court.
So potentially multiple locations.
It's possible, but remember, this provision is optional, not mandatory.
Okay.
No one can force the president or the Chief Justice to establish these additional seats. It's more about flexibility for the future.
Makes sense. How does the Supreme Court set its own rules and procedures?
The Supreme Court has the power to make its own rules. For regulating its practices and procedures, it's like setting the ground rules for a very important game. However, these rules aren't set in stone. They need the president's approval.
Again, that balance between autonomy and oversight.
Exactly.
How are cases typically heard and decided?
Well, for cases dealing with constitutional matters or presidential references, you need a bench of at least 5 judges. It's like an all-star team tackling the toughest legal questions.
Okay.
For other cases, a bench of at least 3 judges is the norm.
I imagine these proceedings are open to the public.
Absolutely. Transparency is key. Decisions are made by majority vote, but judges can issue dissenting opinions if they disagree with the majority ruling.
So different perspectives are recorded.
Yes.
It's fascinating, these legal minds deliberating on matters of national importance.
It is, and it reminds us that the law isn't always black and white.
All right, there are often different interpretations. Speaking of shades of gray, let's talk about the Supreme Court's independence.
Yes, a crucial aspect.
We've touched on it, but can you remind us about the provisions guaranteeing this freedom from external influence?
Of course. We've discussed the appointment process, security of tenure, and the restrictions on talking about a judge's conduct in Parliament.
Right.
Those are all crucial safeguards. But there's more.
Tell me more.
Remember how we talked about judges' salaries being fixed by Parliament and
Right.
protected from being changed to their disadvantage?
Yes.
That's another big one. It ensures they're not financially vulnerable to political pressure.
No financial incentives.
Right. It's about creating a level playing field where judges can make decisions based on the law, not on external pressures.
What other safeguards are there?
Well, all the Supreme Court's expenses, salaries, pensions, administrative costs are charged directly to the Consolidated Fund of India.
So Parliament can't directly vote on those expenses.
Correct, though they can be discussed.
It's like a financial shield, protecting the court from budgetary maneuvering.
Exactly. And to prevent scrutiny or pressure, the Constitution prohibits any discussion in Parliament about the conduct of Supreme Court judges.
While they're performing their duties?
Yes, except during impeachment proceedings.
Right. A clear separation of powers, preventing interference.
Precisely. And to avoid conflicts of interest, retired Supreme Court judges can't practice law before any court or authority in India.
So they can't leverage their past influence.
Exactly. We also talked about the court's power to punish for contempt, which acts as a deterrent.
Right. That's important. Protecting the court from disrespect.
Yeah.
And obstruction of justice.
Yes. On a more practical level, the Chief Justice of India appoints the Supreme Court's staff and sets their service conditions without interference from the executive branch.
So internal affairs are managed internally.
Yes. All these mechanisms work together to create a truly independent judiciary.
It's all making sense now.
Good. And finally, maybe the most important safeguard. The Constitution prevents Parliament from reducing the Supreme Court's jurisdiction and powers.
Interesting.
Parliament can expand the court's jurisdiction if needed, but it can't take away any existing powers.
So the court's authority can't be chipped away over time.
Exactly. All these safeguards uphold a fundamental principle, the separation of the judiciary from the executive. It's about the judiciary acting as a check on other branches of government, making sure they operate within the Constitution.
So it's not just about having a Supreme Court, it's about having an independent one.
Precisely. This independence is crucial for the court to fulfill its role as the ultimate guardian of the Constitution and protector of citizens' rights.
The backbone of Indian democracy.
You could say that. Before
Yeah.
we move on, let's go back to something we discussed earlier. The different categories of advocates who can practice before the Supreme Court.
Ah, yes, the senior advocates, advocates on record, and other advocates.
Yes.
It's a hierarchy within the legal profession. Can you break down their roles for us?
Of course.
Yeah.
Senior advocates are recognized for their exceptional expertise in standing at the bar. They're often involved in high-profile cases, and they play a significant role in shaping legal arguments and precedents.
The top tier. What about advocates on record?
They're the only ones authorized to file matters or represent a party directly in the Supreme Court. They know the ins and outs of the court's procedures, ensuring everything is done correctly.
Sounds like a specialized role. What about other advocates on the roles of state bar counsels?
They can argue cases in the Supreme Court,
Okay.
but they can't file documents directly. They often work with senior advocates or advocates on record, providing support and expertise. It's a team effort.
Everyone plays a part
Yes.
to ensure the best representation for clients.
Exactly.
The Supreme Court and the legal profession are so complex.
We've only just scratched the surface.
I'm already overwhelmed and we're not even done yet.
Don't worry, we're almost there. But before we wrap up our deep dive into the Indian Supreme Court, we need to address the most important question.
What does this all mean for the average citizen?
Exactly. We've explored the structure, the powers, the procedures, but ultimately it's about how the Supreme Court impacts the lives of everyday Indians. And that's what we'll discuss next.
Welcome back. We've explored the ins and outs of the Supreme Court. The powers, the structure, all those procedures.
We have.
But let's be real for a second. What does it all mean for the everyday person? For the student, the chaiwala, the farmer?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
The Supreme Court might seem far removed from daily life, but its decisions actually ripple through society, shaping everything.
So it's not just some abstract legal thing. It actually touches people's lives.
Absolutely.
Give us some examples. How does the Supreme Court really impact the lives of ordinary Indians?
Think about the court's rulings on things like privacy or freedom of speech, environmental protection.
Okay, yeah.
Those aren't just words on paper.
Right.
They directly affect how we live,
Yeah.
how we interact with the government, even how we see our own rights.
Makes sense. For those prepping for the UPSC exams, what's the key takeaway about the Supreme Court?
For the UPSC folks out there, understanding the Supreme Court, it's more than memorizing articles and cases. It's about getting the essence of the Constitution.
Right.
The Supreme Court is like a guardian of that document and a protector of individual rights.
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
Okay.
Upholding the law, but also pushing for progress. How does the Supreme Court manage that?
It's a constant back and forth, a dynamic process. The court interprets the Constitution in light of today's challenges. Sometimes it upholds the existing order. Sometimes it's a force for change.
So it's not stuck in the past.
Not at all.
It adapts. It's pretty amazing when you think about how much weight its decisions carry.
Exactly. That's why it's so important for citizens to really engage with the court's decisions.
Engaging with the decisions. That's interesting.
It's more than just accepting them passively. It's about being active in shaping our democracy.
I like that.
It means reading those judgments, discussing them, understanding their impact on us. The Supreme Court isn't just for lawyers and judges, it's for everyone.
That's a fantastic point to end on. We've gone through the history, the powers, all the intricacies of the Supreme Court. But now it's your turn to dive deeper.
Exactly. Explore those cases that have shaped India, the judges who have made their mark, the debates about the court's role in our evolving society.
Because understanding the Supreme Court, it's not just about acing an exam. It's about understanding Indian democracy at its core.
Oh, well said.
So keep learning, keep questioning, keep engaging. And until next time, happy deep diving.